There's a poll that's out that said that 1/3 of Trump voters told the pollsters that the attack on the Capitol was, quote, actually carried out by opponents of Donald Trump. What do your sources tell you about this sort of disinformation campaign, or are people just sort of holding on to this sort of these lies just because they can't really grasp the idea that these supporters were in fact supporters of the former president?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of politically inconvenient for them. They don't want to acknowledge that, right? Like, that's bad if your supporters attack the Capitol because they believed the lies about the stolen election. So there have been all these efforts, whether it's saying that it was somehow Black Lives Matter or undercover Antifa people, or perhaps it was the FBI behind this. There's just all these sort of theories that they're throwing out the wall. And it is just sort of frustrating as a reporter to have to cover this because some of it is just like such nonsense. And there's just basic facts that you could put up against the table and say, okay, well, here's the reasonable explanation for this. But it doesn't really seem to matter because people are so willing to believe these lies and just are so ready to find any excuse that would really, sort of brush off the fact of what actually happened on January 6th, which is that people who thought the election were stolen stormed the Capitol. And because they believed these lies, they took action. Because if you actually think this is the crime of the century, it makes kind of sense that you would do something about it. If you thought that behind those doors of the Capitol, the crime of the century was happening, you might do something about that.
Yeah. And in that same vein, Ryan, one of the people who are sort of spreading the disinformation and the lies is Matt Gaetz. He held a press conference that accused the federal government of being behind this. I would try to ask you an articulate question, but the question really is, what in the world is going on?
Yeah, I think with the specific individual he focused on was this individual, Ray Epps. And I completely think that there's a possibility now that Ray Epps is cooperating with the FBI after January 6th. But I would be absolutely astonished if he was working for the FBI during January 6th itself. And I think that there's a much more reasonable and there's a much more reasonable explanation for what is going on with that case, which is that this is an individual who was on the grounds of the Capitol but didn't enter into the Capitol building, and there's no evidence that he attacked officers outside of the building. And those are really the lines that prosecutors have drawn. Because he's not in that category, he would sort of be an outlier if he was charged because he's only on the grounds of the Capitol, and prosecutors have decided that anyone who's in the grounds of the Capitol, there's too many of them. There's thousands of them. They're not going to charge them. So they're going to sort of, those cases are sort of going to go away. So it would kind of be, based on the evidence that's public facing right now, it would be unusual if this individual was charged. But that's really not the narrative that you see seeing spun up on many sort of right-wing websites and on Fox News.